Expertise, and I'm Angela, and I'm here today with Ben Nicholas. He is a senior concept artist who's worked for Ubisoft 343, Creative Assembly, where he worked on Halo Wars 2, and Adidas. He also created the hashtag ArtShare on Twitter. We're working to bring attention to and support other artists. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So how did you get started in concept art?
So my concept art, how I got into it is really kind of based around my childhood. And it wasn't until further in my career that I realized why that's the case. The fact is my older brother and my dad both collected old sci-fi books. So there's all these old covers with work from John Harris and Mobius and stuff like that. And so as a kid, I was constantly rifling through all of those. And also both my mom and my dad kind of made art on the side as hobbies. The other part of it is my dad was a pilot. And so I always grew up in airports and hanging around aircraft, planes and helicopters and things like that. Those are my jungle gyms. And so really I got into sci-fi at a really, really young age. And so I actually, funnily enough, though, originally wanted to be a journalist. And I was planning on being a journalist until really the end of high school, because I've been teaching myself 3D on and off since I was 13. And so by the end of high school, I said, I don't want to be a journalist. I don't actually want to write. It's I want to make art. And realized deep down, that was the passion that I really had. But when I went through college and then even when I graduated, I didn't start out in concept art. I actually started out as an environment artist. And so I was working with designers to build levels. And that's kind of what I thought was a good fit. And it wasn't until it's been 4 years now or something like that, that I realized concept art was what I loved. It was all about those book covers. It was wanting to go back and work so hard to make this single image that communicated so much to me as a kid. Because I remember those emotions that they invoked and that sense of mystery. And I liked creating this final image that would empower people to come up with their own stories and kind of project themselves. It all sounds very, very melodramatic, but it's super true. It was...
No, it's awesome.
That was what I realized was the most meaningful thing to me. And, it's funny because as an adult, like I said, I didn't realize where a lot of those inspirations came from. It wasn't until after years of making art that I realized that those inspirations were instilled for me from a very, very young age. So that's the long and short of it.
How did you break into actually doing it as a job?
Yeah, that's a weird one because I went to art school in Portland, Oregon, and I had a game art. I was a game art and video game design bachelor degree. But throughout school, to kind of support myself, I was freelancing a little bit. So I did some freelancing for Nike and for Apple and stuff, doing just quick product things and things like that. And near the end of school, I had a whole lot of student debt and desperately needed a job. There's not a lot of game studios in Portland, Oregon. But because I had done some work for Nike, Adidas contacted me because both Adidas and Nike have their headquarters in Portland, Oregon. And so they asked, hey, would you like to come on board and help us out? And I was I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know almost nothing about shoes or sports. I'm this video game nerd. But they showed me how much I'd get paid, and I said yes immediately because I have all these student loans and desperately need to pay off. And so, yeah, I took that and I worked at Adidas for about 2 years and did concept design for footwear and some apparel and things like that. But really deep down in my heart, I was really desperate to get into games. And it took a while for me to actually be able to break in, and at times I almost gave up. I didn't think I was good enough. I didn't think I was going to make it, and thought that kind of dream was done. I remember that being a very depressive time. But eventually, what happened was there's a small company called Camouflage that was working on a Metal Gear Solid inspired stealth action game for mobile, and I, out of the blue, said, I'm going to write them an email and see if they need anybody. And it turns out they totally did. So that was my first step into into games.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So what are your preferred mediums?
It's 3D. It's 3D, a little bit of Photoshop and 2D. Mostly I do 3D because that's what I started as an environment artist. You know, as an environment artist, you're constantly building these environments using 3D programs. And that's where I became the fastest and the quickest. Like the dirty secret is I can't draw to save my life. I'm like really, really awful at it. And so since I knew how to model quickly and to build things out really quickly, it was like, okay, at the end of the day, I just need a final image. I can use whatever tools I need to get it done. So that's it.
That's pretty cool. All right, so influences. What would you say are your major influences besides those art books from that your family collected?
Yeah. It is a lot of artists from the 60s and 70s. A lot of classic sci-fi. Like I saw the movie Alien when I was way too young to have seen it, along with Aliens, and those, like for many artists, like extremely formative movies for me. And I was also like, I grew up watching Star Trek, Star Trek and like Stargate and things like that, and of course Star Wars. Like those things were so like influential to me, like as a kid. And so it is this like golden era sci-fi. This is stuff that I consider to be like really, really classic. Specific artists like John Harris, Mobius, Ralph McQuarrie, like things like that. Like really like artists that are still up in this pedestal that I feel like I'm trying to reach, that were just kind of like legendary. But also the thing that I find in common about a lot of my inspirations is that it's not very like violent sci-fi. The stuff I was inspired by is things that invoke like a sense of wonder.
Right.
Like that's why Star Trek was so important to me as a kid. Was like I was always filled with a sense of awe when I saw these spaces, and like that's absolutely still the case now. So yeah.
That's pretty cool. I can see that.
Yeah.
So you've been working on an interesting project called, is it COM44?
Yes.
What is COM44 and how did you come up with it?
So COM44 is that World War II ends with this giant global bombardment that the Soviet Union bombs everybody else, and it creates this kind of cataclysm, like this rift in space and time. And so the Soviet Union is left intact, but they reform into a new government called the Commissariat, and they build a giant wall around Russia, while the rest of the world is essentially like an exclusion zone, like Chernobyl. And so outside of the walls of the Commissariat is a world that's completely changed. Time and space don't behave like they used to, and so there's all of these anomalies. And so it's about those people going back out and discovering the ruins left in World War II and what's happened to the world and documenting it.
Wow.
So
cool.
Thank you. Like the pitch, like for me internally, was I wanted a way to basically write myself a get out of jail free card so I could do lots of really, really cool visuals in this world and be able to tell as many stories as I wanted. But like, as far as where it came from, like there's some clear like inspirations in film. In film, it's Stalker by Tarkovsky, and then for books, it's like Roadside Picnic and things like that, like these Eastern European sci-fi books. And that said, like where it actually came from was, I think, a little bit of frustration on my part, because I do a lot of like quick art pieces.
Right.
I don't spend weeks working on a piece. I usually spend at most 2 or 3 evenings working on something. And I think I started to get a little bit self-conscious. I was wondering like what I need to do something more. Like what am I actually doing like on a larger scale? And as somebody like, I mentioned earlier, I wanted to be a journalist. Writing is really important to me. And I realized I wasn't telling stories the way I feel I need to. Like that need was not necessarily being fulfilled. And so I wanted to make a bigger project where it wasn't just about the art. It was about stories and world building. And I wanted to create a world that like I was interested in, that I could see myself wandering around and exploring in. And once again, like I wanted to do what other artists had done for me, which is when I see an image, be empowered to come up with my own stories. And so I wanted to create this world, this COM44 thing, where I could tell my own stories, but also empower other people to kind of build their own narratives in it. Because like I had this belief that when you leave a little bit of ambiguity in a piece of art and empower people to build their own stories, they're going to care about that story way more than whatever answers you give them. And you create this like closer connection with the audience. Like it's something that more meaningful. And that's something that I struggle with sometimes, is like, is my art actually meaningful? Will people remember it? And will it hold like a place in their heart in a way? And so, long story short, that's kind of where it came from.
Yeah. So do you plan, basically, I noticed you release pieces of art on Twitter, on your ArtStation.
Yeah.
Do you plan on putting it all together and with like narrative and?
So it's funny, actually the last few weeks I've started thinking about a book. It would be like my first art book. And so I started testing the waters yesterday to see if people would react, and the response was a pretty overwhelming yes. So I'm still kind of investigating it right now, but ideally I would absolutely love to do an art book that's a collection of like short stories and then these images come out together. Awesome, yeah. So that's kind of the goal. Yeah.
All right. So this show is very much about process.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your process of creating a piece, say from idea to finished product.
Yeah. So I found that there is a way to train yourself so that ideas come fairly regularly, and that's by trying to make at least a little bit of art on a daily basis. I believe in like a routine, and so for me, like I know that when I sit at my desk at whatever time in the morning or in the evening when I get home, my brain knows that, okay, now is the time to be creative. It wasn't always that way. I used to sit and wait for ideas to come, and you can end up waiting a long time for inspiration to strike. So I found out that by training myself and building a routine, it was so much easier to come up with ideas and to feel creative. So it is that first step of absolutely just sitting at my desk. Like that's such a fundamental thing, but really like that's it. It triggers that kind of synapse. I say, okay, now I need to come up with ideas. And so usually I have a general, like something will pop up and I'll have a general idea, like a spaceship or something like that. When it comes to the actual process of building stuff out, I use a method called kit bashing. And so what that is, it's based off of the old model makers on Star Wars and Alien and things like that. What they would do is go and buy stacks of these model kit boxes, like motorcycles, race cars, whatever. And all of those spaceships, like all the Star Wars spaceships, are just built out of parts from other model kits, all glued together. And so I'm doing a version of that in 3D. I've modeled all these bits and bobs, all these antennas and legs and things like that. And so the initial process is like, it's play. It's like playing with Lego. I'm sitting there and jamming pieces together and seeing what fits. Does this have a cool silhouette? Does this read well? And usually I'll have like a couple of words that I want to describe what I'm working on. Like I'll say like garbage ship or something. So it's like, this needs to evoke the fact that this thing is going to carry garbage, or it's going to be a passenger cruiser. It needs to look a little classier. And so I'm spending a lot of time just playing because like, I don't know if you're familiar with like Bob Ross saying like happy accidents, like on a show, like it's so like that quote is so played out, but I genuinely believe it because my initial idea is usually pretty bad. And like, I don't realize that it's bad and I'm probably really in love with it. And so by playing and experimenting a lot, I'm helping myself realize other cooler ideas. So I'll have like folders and folders in my computer of like the title of a project, but what's in that folder is something completely different than what I initially titled it. It's like very, very different.
It's good if you ever have to keep that secret.
Absolutely. Oh, it's incomprehensible. Like you cannot navigate through those folders. But like, it is like by having that play and giving myself time for accidents, I'm allowing myself this sense of discovery by, hey, I had this idea, but it turns out this other idea I just discovered is like way cooler than what I initially wanted. So it really goes that until like I have it finished, and then comes like final renders and images, and I treat that the way I do photography. I don't have a composition up front that I know I want to build to. I like the idea of, the joy of working in 3D is I can rotate everything around and frame it the way I want. And so I let there be the sense of like, it's like I'm holding a camera. Let's do some multiple different shots that make this thing look really, really cool and make it shine. So that's it.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then so basically you create everything in the program.
Yeah.
And then you render that.
Yeah.
And then you put it up.
Yep, that's it.
That's basically it?
Yeah.
All right. What's something you wish you'd known about art before you began? Before this journey began?
Oh, God. To be honest, I think it's more... It's a little bit kind of the toll that it would take personally. Like, that sounds very, very negative, and I don't mean it to, but realizing how much of an emotional and personal journey art is, because the thing I've realized is, for better or for worse, like, so much of my self-esteem is tied into my art. You know, the thing that I didn't understand when I first got into art is that one of the struggles we have with our self-esteem is, like, we're constantly trying to seek to measure it. Like, we want to be able to quantify it.
Yeah.
And with art, it's a little bit easy because it's like, oh, I made like 2 pieces of art today. And so your self-esteem goes up because I made 2 things today. And it's not really, it's a false equivalence, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't realize, like, what a struggle that would be as an artist, is how much of my self-worth would be tied into, like, the things that I make. And also, like, I remember being in art school and, like, constantly Googling how to be creative or how to have a good idea or things like that. And, like, it was such a long-term process for me to understand myself, like, creatively and emotionally, and to realize how those things connect together. Because I'll tell you, like, I think learning the art and getting good at art is, like, the easy part. It's like, it's a lot of work and it takes time, but it's a pretty clear road. It's just a lot of practice.
Yeah.
Like, it's a very basic idea. But the emotional side of it, and figuring out who you are as an artist, what you want to express, how much of yourself is in each piece, and how that ties into, like, who you are and your identity, like, that's the tougher part, and something that, you know, you have to go through it. I just wish I had known those lessons a little bit earlier. But yeah, that's it.
Well, going from that, on Twitter, you're also very candid about your struggles with mental health.
Yeah.
Why do you feel it's important to speak up about mental health in your own journey with that?
I mean, the one sentence is, like, so other people don't feel alone. And so at times, like, I don't feel alone.
Yeah.
To put in perspective, like, I had undiagnosed depression for about 10 years. And I struggled with that. I struggled with an anxiety disorder and it's a bipolar-like disorder. And all of these things went undiagnosed for a really long time. And then when I did go through initial treatment, I was misdiagnosed. And so I wasn't actually on the proper medication. And so for me, like, one of the things, like, when I try to describe depression to somebody who doesn't have it, I say, like, it's the absence of hope. Because you do feel like you're in this pit that there's no escape and things are never going to get any better. And it is, you know, one of the most soul-crushing feelings. Like, I just had it, my first episode, months over the weekend, and that was, like, a really huge struggle. But the thing is, I'm so much better because before I used to have it a couple times a week or even up to, like, 6 times a month. And what I realized was, like, when I was growing up, like, depression wasn't a thing that was well defined, and there wasn't a lot of resources or information to find out about those things.
Yeah.
And that was even tougher than as an artist, because I saw all of these amazing artists who are doing incredible work who never seemed to have any personal struggles. And it's only later on that I found out that, like, some artists I really look up to struggled with depression in a really, really deep way.
Yeah.
And so that's why I say, like, one of the reasons why I'm vocal about it is because I know that there are other people out there who are in the same position that I was in, where they feel isolated, they feel alone, and just feel like that there's no hope.
Yeah.
And so if I'm able to at least communicate a bit about my experiences, maybe there's a chance that I will be able to, like, help counter that a little bit. And also, like, straight up, like, by being open, I found that I have a support network that I didn't realize I initially had, of people being willing to reach out and help me out, and be rational through that process. You know, not to mention, like, there is this huge stigma around talk of depression, and, like, I've struggled with suicide and things like that.
Yeah.
And there's a stigma against it, and especially with men, like I think there is this emphasis to have like a stiff upper lip and to tough it out, which I think are like really toxic ideas and behaviors. Like
Definitely.
it's when you say, oh, just keep your chin up or just tough it out, like you're essentially dismissing somebody's feelings instead of actually engaging with what those emotions and what that process is. And so for me, like I'm lucky enough to have a big platform and people following me. Like I never expected that. But with that, I think there comes like a responsibility to try to do some good and to try to make a difference. And so for me, transparency about that is important. And you know, on some level, like I also want to be understood. I want people to understand what I'm going through. Like I'd like to be on the receiving end of that, some of that empathy, right? Like, which it took me a long time to realize. Oh, I would like some care as well. So yeah, that's why.
That's great. No, it's great that you can have that, that you can get that, you know, from really in a way strangers.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you feel your mental health has affected your art? Because you know, as you were saying, a lot of the artists that you admired did struggle with the same sort of problem.
Yeah.
About it. And if you think about it, like a lot of artists do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like there's a stereotype that it goes hand in hand, right?
I know.
Like,
I had a teacher who used to say that if you don't experience pain, you can't write.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. You know.
No, I think I think there's totally an element of truth to it.
Yeah.
Like you have to have a little bit of life experience, and you have to go through those emotional ups and downs to recognize things about yourself, and like once again, like and recognize why you're making art. You know,
Yeah.
Sometimes I make art just to cope with things that are bad. And it is this signpost, like it's the stick in the ground of just saying, well, I was productive even though I was feeling really, really bad. That's not always the healthiest mindset, but it happens. You know, I think going back to what I said earlier, I think my mental health, like a lot of my depression and self-esteem has been tied into like art and art productivity for sometimes for better and sometimes for much worse. Because when you're in that state of hopelessness, you want to be able to know that you can make something. Like you want to know that you're at least contributing something and like feel useful in some way, because you do feel so deeply useless. And so art has sometimes been a way for me to be able to express that. The downside of that is that when there's a really big depressive episode and I don't make art, then I feel completely worthless. And so it's this double-edged sword where then I feel like, oh, I can't do anything. Well, what's the point? And that can spiral into some like really, really dark trails of thought. So there's times where I think, I'll be frank, there's times where art is like a close friend, and other times where it feels like just the worst enemy to me. Like it's a very contentious relationship, something I'm still trying to sort out a little bit, right? So, yeah.
All right. Well, how do you cope with stress, with obstacles?
Yeah, it's been like a process. Like one thing that I got really into is like mindfulness meditation. Like to be honest, like when the word meditation is thrown around, like I kind of like used to shut off like really quickly, because I always thought it was a little bit. I mean, no disrespect, anybody, it was something I didn't take particularly seriously, and like that was my fault. I was very like uneducated and didn't realize like mindfulness meditation is breathing exercises. It's training yourself to focus on the present as opposed to focusing on the past or the future, the things that can cause me to spiral into like a depressive episode. Because like one of the key factors of my depression sometimes is worrying about what could happen or stressing about what has happened. And mindfulness is there to keep you in the present and saying, well, all I can focus on is the now, so that's what I should be like putting my energy into. So that's been a big one, is like breathing exercises, and that helped with like the panic attacks. I'll be honest, the other big part, this is fundamental, was like therapy and medication. I did cognitive behavioral therapy. I've been in and out of therapy for about 10 years, and those were like going to therapy was the best decision of my life. Like I think even people who aren't severely depressed should absolutely go to therapy, because you learn so much about yourself and you realize like there's so many things you don't know about who you are as a person, that you find out through therapy and digging things up. And so that's like a really, really key one. And then for me, medication, like I wouldn't be here if I hadn't been put on like the proper medication for both my anxiety, and bipolar. Like that made, it's like it's like holding your breath or being underwater for a really long time and finally being able to breathe again. Like has like a really, really profound effect. And so before I was on medication, I couldn't cope. I was really at a whim to my own mood swings, and that was an exhausting place to live in because you can't trust yourself and you don't know who you're going to be from one minute to the next. And that's a really, I can't say enough, it's an incredibly scary thing not to know yourself and not to be able to trust yourself and to feel this fear. And so when I was put on the right medication, that enabled me to actually be able to use the tools that I learned in therapy to be able to cope. Because before I knew the tools, but those mood swings would be so intense, I couldn't actually use what I had learned, and use those lessons. Like rationality kind of goes out the window. It is like 100% like very intense emotion. So yeah.
Do you get blocked?
Like art block?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my god, yeah.
What do you do when that happens?
Oh my god.
There's no ideas.
Oh my god. I kind of cry in despair a little bit, and I like seriously, I've been through it enough times, but I still feel like when it hits, I get that sense of, oh my god, I'm never going to be a good artist again. I'm never going to be able to make another piece of art. It's all very melodramatic, but it does feel like in that moment, it feels so intense, like, oh no, I'm not going to be able to make anything.
Yeah.
What I am still learning, it's still a work in progress, but what I'm learning is to step away and to take a break, and realizing that a huge, key, important part of making art is knowing when to step away and to focus on other things.
Yeah.
And find other things that I enjoy doing, like photography and stuff, and things where there isn't such a level of expectation. Like a thing I learned is just going to the museum. Just going to the museum and looking at sculpture, or looking at like going to a science museum, something to take my mind off the art. And I find that the moment that I can distract myself, good ideas tend to come flowing back really quickly. Like art block is sometimes just our brain's way of saying, hey, could you knock it off? Like, you've been working really hard. Can we just do something else for a little bit? So yeah, that's it.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good approach, I think.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we've talked about a lot, but do you have? Oh, you know what? Do you have any more advice for people starting out?
Like a core thing that I would say is like, hey, it's gonna be like a long journey. Like you're not gonna get there immediately. Like, keep your expectations in check. When it comes to your own work and how much you turn out. And I say this to them, but also to myself as somebody who's still struggling with it, is your expectations tend to be way higher than anybody else's. And that can be a blessing in that it pushes you to be better. It can also be extremely destructive because you're hitting this bar that you just can't hit yet.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like, it is okay to lower your expectations a bit. The other part is like, make bad art. Like, just make art. It doesn't have to be great. Not every piece needs to be a portfolio piece. Don't go in with this huge expectation that every piece is going to be the one that lands you a job or like gets you promotion or what have you.
Yeah.
Like, be okay with the process and making lots and lots of art, because like, it's part of the process. Like, practice is such a key part, and like, you just want to be able to make a bunch of stuff, throw it out, make some more stuff, and throw it out. Like, it's gonna happen. The other part is like, learn about who you are as an artist. Like, when you're first starting out, this is the case with most artists I know, you don't really have like a point of view or like a taste. Like, your art isn't necessarily indicative of the taste and the things you love. You're just kind of fumbling through things and learning.
Yeah.
But as you progress and as you keep making stuff, you start learning a little bit about yourself and a little bit about where your inspirations come from. And that is what makes you special. And I really genuinely mean that, is like, that's you have this point of view, like this style that other people don't have. And as you progress, you'll start owning that more and more. But it is a process of self-discovery. It is a process of like practice. And as far as process goes, like learn to enjoy that process because you're going to be in it a lot. Like you're going to be doing it a lot. And so I'll be honest, like when I finish a piece, it's a little bit of a letdown. Like that's one of the reasons I make so much art is because I like being in the midst of the process.
Yeah.
That is the most empowering part, the part that I'm most excited about. So I think like that would kind of sum it up. I mean, the other part is like be aware of yourself and your own mental health. Like being an artist can be a really tough gig, and just because like if you don't have like mental health problems that are as severe as mine doesn't mean that they're not as legitimate. Just like I know people who have way bigger struggles. Like I'm still super privileged. I'm like a straight white dude. Like I have it pretty easy. Like there are people out there who have it way harder. Like it doesn't make your struggle any more or less like important and necessary for like treatment and help. And make sure that as you're making art, you have a support network, not just to give you feedback on your art, but to be there for you as a person, because I find that personal journey and that artistic journey are like really heavily entwined. Even line between personal and professional can really blur because those things carry on with you into work. Those depressive episodes like have affected my work. Like I'm not necessarily ashamed to say that, but it's important. It's important to know that and own that early on, because otherwise you feel helpless. You feel like you're supposed to be a certain way that you can't necessarily be, and to perform in a way that like you might not be emotionally capable of in that moment. And you need to know that that's okay. So yeah.
No, that's all really important.
Yeah.
So what do you like most about making art?
It's like it's a moment. It is a moment where I'm past the initial blank page, and I am just playing, and I'm in a flow. Like that's it. Where I'm in this flow, where I'm putting stuff together, I have music running, and I feel very empowered, and I feel lost in my own space, and the ideas are coming faster and faster, and like there is, like, it sounds so dramatic, but like there is this creative spark in the moment that like it's that feeling. I'll be honest, it's just chasing that feeling.
Yeah.
Like, that's why when I'm finished, it's like whatever. Like the piece is up. That's cool. Like it's done. What about the next piece? Because I just want to get back into that flow because it feels meditative. For me personally, it's a moment where all of a sudden I can work, and while I'm in those zones, I'm also processing through things that have happened during the day, or things that happened like a few weeks ago, and I'm doing some like important introspection, but it's mixed with this creative process. And so for me, I find it to be like really like healing and like really meditative and helpful for me, that it's not just about the thing that I'm making, it's about me and like who I am in that moment. And that, like, I can't describe it any better than that. That moment is just like super, super important to me. It means
That's
a lot.
pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we're at the point where I'm going to ask you, how can people find out more about you and your work?
Okay. So everywhere I'm Belgian Boolean, Belgian, Boolean. Everybody gets the spelling wrong, but Belgian Boolean on Twitter. That's where I talk the most about mental health. You can also find me at ArtStation under the same name. Or just search for Ben Nicholas Artist. I'm sure I'll pop up somewhere. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
And fortunately, we'll have links to as much as we can in the description of the video below.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Ben. Thank you, everybody, for watching. This has been Everyday Expertise. I'm Angela.
And I'm Ben. Thank you so, so much.
Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this interview. Be sure to share this video with friends and colleagues who may also enjoy this topic. Let us know your thoughts by leaving a comment below, or check the description for our social media. See you next time.